Hey, this is Matt from Chez Pascal in the WurstKitchen. Welcome back to episode 2 of Customer Favorites. Today, we're talking French onion soup. I know a lot of people have been upset with us since we haven't had the French onion soup on the menu. And I want to just explain why we don't anymore, and that's why we're going to show you how to make it here so you can enjoy it at home. But ever since COVID and how our menu has changed, the style of cooking has changed. We're doing a lot of food, sort of prepared foods, baking them in the convection oven, sending them home to people. And we have one convection oven, and that's really the most important tool that we had to make this onion soup the way we do it. And with all these items going in and out of this oven, it would really compromise the quality of that soup. So we just had to say, you know what, we just can't do this the way we used to do it. Therefore, we're just going to take it off the menu. And I know a lot of people were upset about that, and I'm really sorry, but that's just what we had to do in order to push forward and get through this. If it was on the menu still, I wouldn't be showing you here. So now we need to talk about some of the ingredients that we need for making onion soup. So obviously, we need onions, okay? There are a lot of different types of onions. They're all within the allium family. What we have always used are what's called Spanish onions, or a white onion, sort of the workhorse of the commercial kitchen. We clean them, we peel them, and we slice them paper thin. Now there's no reason why you can't use some red onions mixed with Spanish onions, even shallots, okay? They all get along in the pot once they start cooking. But again, we're here to show you how we did this. Once you understand the method and the technique, that's what's fun about cooking. You can change. You don't have Spanish onions, you have a bunch of red onions. You try it, you either decide, I like it better, it's not quite as good, and then that's part of developing recipes and ideas as far as cooking. So, we know that we need onions. There's a lot of other things you need. We talk about stocks. You can reference some of our earlier videos on stock making. For our soup, we use a rich, heavy, either veal stock, it could be a beef stock. Right now we're using a pork stock, so all the bones are roasted, the mirepoix caramelized, simmers for a long time. It has great flavor, richness, a lot of body. We're using a chicken stock. That cuts the richness of the pork stock, and it just makes a nice balance for the soup. Obviously we have onions. They need to be sliced really thin. That's how we like to do it, okay? The reason why we slice them nice and thin, we want to extract the moisture, then we want to caramelize them. We also are using thinly sliced onions because we really want to impart a lot of onion flavor in the soup, but when we're eating the soup, we don't want to have big chunks of onions in the soup. After we've discussed the stocks, we have onions sliced very thin. We use dried thyme and bay leaf. Now remember, when you add the bay leaf into the soup, it's your responsibility to find that bay leaf once the soup is cooled and take it out. We're using red wine, again, a good quality wine, but it doesn't have to be very expensive. We're using it for acidity and color, and then we use a dry sherry. So 2 spirits go into this. Obviously, we're doing salt and pepper, okay? Kosher salt, black pepper. And then we do need some butter. Butter is what helps start the caramelization process in the onions. It has great flavor. We use a little bit of blended oil in addition to the butter. And the reason we do that is it helps bring up the smoking point, if you will, or raise the temperature so we don't burn the butter before things caramelize. So that's just a little trick. We use a little bit of blended oil with the butter. We caramelize the onions, and that's the process we're going to show. So again, you might think that this soup is really simple, but if you look at the amount of products and the time that we invest in this, you can understand why this thing tastes so good. Now, I've been to other places and tried different styles of onion soups. I once had one in Chicago where it was completely blonde, white. They just stewed the onions down. They probably just served it within the juices that came out of the onions. They never caramelized them. And at first I was like, this is just not the way it should be. But as I started to eat it, I realized the simplicity and the flavors were really good, and it was a nice way to present an onion soup. So again, there's a lot of different styles of making this soup. Ours tends to be really rich and heavy. You get the toasted stale bread. We use Gruyere cheese and raclette. You could use a Swiss cheese. For me, again, that's almost the best part. The flavor that cheese and bread imparts or takes from the broth is so good. So we're going to go through all the steps nice and slowly, and we encourage people to try this at home. So now we're going to get into making our soup. I'm using a nice heavy bottomed, this is a enameled cast iron pan. Again, I had mentioned we have butter, so we're adding in our butter. Recipe will be underneath me in some sort of link form. So the butter goes in. Now remember, you want it to melt, but we don't want the butter to start browning or burn. So moderate heat, then we're going to add our blended oil. Now there's a couple ways that we do this soup. Traditionally, we would make the soup, season it, chill it, refrigerate it, and then any bit of excess fat that might have formed on the top of the soup you can remove. But right now we're going to make the soup start to finish. We're going to ladle it into our crocks and bake it. So you may have to skim a little bit of butter, but honestly, that, let's call it that fat that will be on the top is going to get absorbed into the bread. We're adding the cheese. So again, it's just another component in the soup that just makes it taste really good. And now we have lots of onions, okay? It's French onion soup, you need lots of onions. So they're sliced thin like we discussed, and they just go right into the pot. Now don't worry, it might look like too much for this pot, but they're gonna really cook down. We're gonna start the caramelization process. They're gonna lose a lot of volume. So remember, when we're talking about cooking vegetables, we wanna sweat the vegetable out first. But normally, you might think, well, Matt has said cover it to sweat something. We want all that moisture to be removed, so we still want to start sweating the vegetable, getting rid of moisture. You'll see some steam, but don't cover it because that'll keep all that moisture in there. It'll be harder to caramelize. And now we're going to add just a little bit of salt. Adding the salt now helps pull out the moisture. It'll aid in the sweating process, then the caramelization process. And we just stir them about. And this is going to take, this probably takes about 15-20 minutes for the onions to cook down. And then once they do, we're going to get into talking about the fond, deglazing, all things that we've mentioned in other videos. Okay, so as these onions cook, they're going to start to caramelize. You'll know that by the color, the smell. They'll start to get really sweet smelling, almost like, think about it like making a caramel sauce. Okay, you get those notes, those flavors. That's when we need to start paying attention to this because we're looking to develop a really good fond, which is something we've discussed in our videos, and then we're going to need to deglaze. So those are the next two steps that happen in this onion soup. So the onions have been simmering for 15-20 minutes. They've just begun to start the caramelization process. So this is where we need to really start paying attention, stirring, because that fond that we talk about is starting to develop and it can easily burn. So we stir this. At this point, now that that fond is developing, onions are caramelizing. You can really smell the difference from the onions in the beginning to this point. Now is when we want to be ready to deglaze and have our stock. So again, we talk about the importance of mise en place. You'd want to have all this stuff set up, ready to go before we start making our soup, because once this starts to happen, you don't want to be measuring out your wines, your stocks. Oh, go get the stock from the refrigerator. Have it all on hand. So it's really important that we have good habits, and it makes cooking that much more enjoyable. So we're just about at the point where we need to deglaze. And if you don't know what that is, you look it up, or better yet, go to one of our other videos where I discuss it. We are ready to get the dried thyme in, then we're going to deglaze. So we're adding our dried thyme, and the bay leaf can go in now too. Why I'm doing that? Because I like to toast the dried herbs into the product, then we add the wine and spirits. So again, we're looking at that. That's the fond developing. We don't really want to let that get much further because it's going to taste bitter. We're going to add our dried thyme and bay leaf. We're going to stir it in just to sort of toast these up. And now I want to deglaze. So again, we've talked about deglazing. I'm not worried about this pan flaming up because of the high sides, but if we were using a shallow pan and you're deglazing, turn the heat off, add the spirits, let them reduce. It makes no difference which goes first. I just happen to grab the sherry. The sherry's going in first. And that's really going to start removing all the caramelization, all the bits in the bottom of our pan. And you do want to stir it. At this point, we need to be involved in what we're making. There we go again. You see that right there? That's what we want to stir up as much as you can. Now that the sherry went in, we add our red wine. That goes in as well. Now at this point, we're going to reduce the liquid, okay, so that's the red wine and the sherry. We reduce it down to almost dry. Sometimes it would be referred to as sec. You should not see any liquid. It'll just be the onions. The onions are going to pick up the color from the red wine and the sherry, and then we add our stocks. Another important technique that we've discussed when we were talking about stock making is as you're reducing things, there tends to be a buildup on the edge of the pan or the saucepan, saute pan, whatever you're using. So again, a great technique is a pastry brush in water. And basically what you want to do is you want to take that brush, dip it into the water, and clean the edge of the pan. There's a lot of reasons we're doing this. Think of that as the fond. Think about how much easier it is to clean the pan once everything is done if you don't have that built up burnt mark around your pan, and you're just adding more flavor back into that soup. Now don't worry about, oh, he's adding water. Water is going to evaporate and reduce out. It affects it in no way. Okay, so just using the water, and look how nice and clean that pan comes. All right, now I wouldn't use a stock because a stock would actually tend to just burn and it would defeat the purpose of what I'm trying to do. So really water is the best technique for this. We've caramelized the onions, we've added our dried thyme and bay leaf, we've then deglazed using our red wine and our sherry wine. The reason we do that is to remove the fond that had developed, adding flavor to our soup. We're reducing the wine and sherry, and then the next step is to add our stocks. From that point, once our stocks are added, the soup simmers for about an hour, hour and a half. Low flame, just let it go. This is where all the flavors are really going to marry well together. So we just add our chicken stock. And again, this amount that we're making, if you're making onion soup, you want to make enough for several servings. So this should do about 6 to 8 of the, what we use a crock, like a 6 to 8 ounce crock. The soup would freeze fine. It holds for a long time. It's just something, if you're doing it, you might as well make a good sized batch. And plus, because it simmers, it's going to reduce. So the volume does decrease. And now we would just bring this to a boil. When it boils, this gives us an opportunity to lightly skim the surface of any of the fat, the butter, or the blended oil that we use will rise to the surface. You can remove that by using a ladle, which again has been discussed in other videos when we make stocks. So that helps get rid of some of the impurities and the fat that's there. The soup has been cooking for about an hour to an hour and a half. It has reduced. We've been maintaining the perimeter of the pan with our pastry brush, just like that. You want to continue to do that as it reduces so you have a nice clean pan. And now I just want to refresh on how we degrease. So we use a ladle, and you want to put the flame to one side of the pan, and then in theory it moves the grease towards the opposite side of the heat. And we want to use our ladle, and we just skim it, just the surface. Now sometimes doing this, because there's onions and the thyme, you do get a little bit of that in with the degreasing. That's okay. We're just really trying to get some of the fat off of the top of the soup, like that, and sort of the impurities that will come up. They sort of bubble up and foam, just like that, and that's good. Now again, you can cool this overnight. The fat would solidify to the top, and you would easily notice the difference, and you can remove it then. But since we're making the soup right now, we want to put it into our crocks and bake it in the oven. This is a good technique to know how to do. So we've degreased it. Now we have to finish seasoning it. So remember, all we did in the beginning, we added thyme, bay leaf, and a little bit of salt. We don't want to season it in the very beginning to taste because of all the reduction that's happening. You could run the risk of over seasoning. So now we're ready to serve this. We're going to finish the seasoning. We always add a little bit of sherry wine vinegar. The reason we do this, it really brightens up the flavors in the soup, and then we'll adjust the seasoning with salt and black pepper. So we put that in. I just want to taste it to see where I'm at as far as seasoning. So it's always good to taste your food, right? I can tell you it's hot. So it needs more salt, it needs more black pepper. That's a given. So we add a little salt, and we're adding a little black pepper. And then we'll stir that in, and then we're going to get into filling our dishes, and we're going to bake it in the oven. So for that, remember, we're using, I don't want to say, I said stale bread. You really don't want to use stale bread. We used our ciabatta. We cut the crust off. We tossed it with some olive oil and herbs, and we bake it in the oven. We want to dry it out so it'll absorb some of the moisture from the onion soup, and then it allows also the cheese to sit on top. So it's sort of like a life jacket for our cheese. We want the cheese to be on top of the bread, so as we start to bake it, it slowly starts to melt and doesn't sink to the bottom of the soup. And that, to me, is the favorite part of the onion soup, is that crusty cheese and bread that sits on top of the soup. We're ready to fill our onion soup crocks. One trick we've learned to do is, if you're using a baking dish like we're using, a little food release on the bottom is because when we put the crock on, we put the soup in, the bread, the cheese, it bubbles over when it's cooking. That's what you want to happen because it looks amazing, but the spray will help the crock come off of the baking dish. So now we're just going to fill this just with our ladle. And now you can see the onions are really nice and soft. All right, you want to have a nice mixture of onions and broth. Like that. And you can see the richness in the color. I mean, this is going to be beautiful. It's going to taste so good. It's bringing back lots of memories. Okay, so then our bread now, you could use a large piece of bread that sits on top, but we found that these little small sort of crouton style work really well because as you eat it, the bread is already sort of cut up in small pieces rather than trying to break through that one big piece. So now you take the bread, goes right on top, and now the cheese. This is the important part. We're using, again, Gruyere cheese, raclette cheese, equal parts mixed, shredded, and do not skimp on the cheese. It should be piled high like this. And then we're going to throw this in the oven. The onion soup has come out of the oven. Because the onion soup started out hot, it only took about 8 to 10 minutes in a 450-degree oven, really hot. It should make a mess. Generally, if something's messy, it tastes good. Another way we have done this before is you let the soup sit overnight. It should solidify a little bit because you're using that really rich, intense pork stock, veal, or beef stock. You can fill the crock cold. You can put your croutons and your cheese on top and bake it the same way we just did if it was hot. Just keep in mind, it takes a lot longer for the soup to get warm inside the crock. To remove it, remember we sprayed the pan. We take our side towel, or if you have 2 oven mitts, it's fine, but we're always using side towels. I just simply fold it over. I come up under the, what we would say, the ears, and just lift this off. This is how we have made this onion soup for many years. You have the information and the recipe to make this at home. We appreciate the comments from the last episode we've done. I know there's talk of wanting to learn how to make that warm cabbage salad, how we do the duck confit, how we make cassoulet. We're going to do our best to get through all of those. So I want to thank people again for watching. If you're not a subscriber, we'd really appreciate it if you become one. We're hoping to continue this through, even if we go abroad into Singapore. We're not quite sure how we could do it, but we're going to certainly try to do something. We appreciate the comments, and like I said, we're going to do everything we can to get as many of these videos done in the next few months. And until then, we'll see you again. So thank you again for watching this video. If you're not a subscriber, please do so. We're going to continue making videos as long as we have the time, and until the next one, we'll see you. No, what then? What the hell do you want me to say? You have a card for me and put it up there and I'll say it.
You gotta ask people about what they want.
We already did that. I think I did.
If you can edit both of those 2 things.
We don't want too many comments.
I think there's 4.
That's perfect. 4 is better than none.
Yeah.
Okay, one more time. Thank you again for watching this video. If you're not a subscriber, please push some kind of button that will make you one. And until we're back in front of the camera, we'll see you later. Done. That's it. I'm over. I've already moved on. So you fix it, Deb, and I'll leave you guys this onion soup.
Yay!
Here, come here. Wait, get over here. Put Eric on camera right now.
Then you had to do it over again.
Okay. Oh yeah, should I? I'll do the intro. I'm in charge. We can't.
What am I saying?
Nothing. I'll tell you what to say, kid. Okay, so here's an example of someone who watches our videos but is not a subscriber.
That is not true.
Oh.
I am a subscriber.
Okay, edit that. That's it.
You made
There.
me a subscriber.
Yeah, we forced him to be a subscriber because he's one of our purveyors and we wouldn't buy from him unless he's subscribed. So that's how we do things.